We all know people who are selfish and self-centered, and we're that way ourselves more often than we like. But one of the bitter byproducts of selfishness is that it undermines rich and satisfying relationships. So let's take a biblical look at selfishness to try to understand this from God's perspective. And the first thing that we see is that selfishness is at the root of sin. Selfishness is at the heart of the fallen human condition. Ever since Adam and Eve, we've been asserting ourselves. We've asserted that we know better than God, that we elevate what we think is right and what we think is best ahead of what God thinks. And whenever we break God's law, essentially we're placing our desires and our will ahead of or prior to God's will. And that, in fact, is the essence of sin, when we make ourselves, rather than God, the ultimate frame of reference for life. Now that carries over into relationships as well, because it happens. Selfishness says that, we're more important than other people, that we elevate ourselves to the ultimate point of reference with respect to those relationships. So we make our will, our opinions, our feelings, our comfort, our needs, our desires, we make them more important than the thoughts and opinions, the needs of the people around us. And that's how selfishness becomes at the heart and the essence of sin. Now, there's a lot of different words that describe selfishness. The English language has many different words for selfishness, and I think that testifies to the universal scope of this problem. Just think in English, we talk about being arrogant, about being vain, self-conceited, about being self-centered, boastful, being proud, being hard-headed, big-headed, about being self-possessed, about being conceited, an egomaniac, ostentatious, being presumptuous, being boasting and self-indulgent and preoccupied with self, and so many different words that we use. Now, each one of those words has a different nuance, but they all point to this problem of being absorbed with self. Now, the Bible also has a lot of different words and constructions that talk about this problem. It talks about being arrogant. It talks about selfish ambition and vain conceit. The Bible warns about being lovers of ourselves and pleasing ourselves. It talks about being self-seeking or about seeking our own good. And when the Bible uses these different phrases, it never uses them in a positive way, but always by way of warning us. And so with all these different vocabulary, it's not surprising that selfishness takes shape in so many different ways. Now, we're all familiar with people who are overtly selfish. They may be rude or pushy or be very assertive about getting what they want, but others of us are more refined in our selfishness. We might be much more subtle about it and use techniques like guilt or peer pressure, or we might try to maneuver a situation to make it turn out the way we want it to turn out. And selfishness isn't just about actions. It can be about what we don't do, like leaving the dishes for somebody else to clean up. It can also be about our words, like when you say words without thinking about how they might affect the people who hear them, or like when you talk too much. Or selfishness can also be about attitudes. Maybe you give way to let somebody else have their way, but then you're bitter and resentful about it in your heart. Or maybe, you don't, when somebody else gets their way or somebody else gets recognition, then you get bitter about that, or you get pout or you whine about that. Even people who serve can be infected with selfishness. Sometimes our service is to draw attention to ourselves, or to make ourselves seem significant, or people to take note of us. Even when you aren't overtly trying to elevate yourself, then another form of selfishness may be just talking a lot about your own pain or your own troubles. And so there's a lot of different ways that we can be selfish that might seem good on the outside, but even doing good things can be tainted by the motive of selfishness. Even when you're serving and helping and investing time and energy, there can also be this subtle thing that creeps in about being aware of how people notice you, or hoping you get attention, or hoping you get favor for what you've done. And so I want us to be aware of selfishness in our lives. I want us to be honest about looking in the mirror to see the different ways that we're selfish inside and out, because only then can we allow the Holy Spirit to come and bring the redemptive power of Jesus into our lives and into our hearts.